YouTube vinyl community, Ringo Starr fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens, and we are here today to talk about Ringo Starr's 1970 debut solo album, Sentimental Journey, released on Apple Records and arranged by a slew of people. This is a really fascinating departure for Ringo, coming off of being in the biggest band in the world. Let's jump into the backstory here. So, in September of 1969, they had a meeting, the Beatles had a meeting, and John Lennon said, famously, I want a divorce. I want a divorce from the Beatles. And that was hard for a lot of them because they were like, all right, well, this is actually like sort of happening. Each one of them had a moment where they're like, you know what, I'm not showing up today, or I'm going on holiday, or I'm not going to take part in this session because you guys are pissing me off. So they all went through those problems as being a band. It happens. But there came a time where they realized we are outgrowing this and it's bigger than we are, and there's a lot to live up to. And also, I think they just hit the end. I think they just reached a point where they were like, you know what, I think we've done it all. So in September of '69, John announces he wants a divorce, and basically the Beatles are kind of done at that point secretly, in secret. So after that happens, the guys kind of like scratch their heads and are like, oh, well, I guess we can do whatever now. So Ringo was like, what am I going to do? What the heck am I going to do? I don't write a bunch of songs. Basically am one of the best drummers in the world for one of the best bands in the world. How do I go forward from here? And the other guys were like, you should do a solo album. And Ringo was like, yeah, all right, that sounds like a fun idea. And he kind of molded over and thought, what would I do if I did a solo album? And so he thought about songs his mom would like, songs his family would like, songs he grew up on. And that kind of was the genesis of this album becoming what it was. And I will go out and say that Ringo was ahead of his time with this, because pop stars weren't really doing a whole lot of this kind of music at that time, especially coming off of being in the Beatles. This is the last album you would have expected from them. That said, you know, the guys were putting out some pretty far out solo stuff at this point that wasn't very Beatle-y in its release. But then, you know, flash forward 30, 40 years later, Rod Stewart has that really insanely popular hits collection where he's doing all the old standards, the American Songbook type stuff. And then McCartney did it on Kisses on the Bottom. So, you know, Ringo was there first, well before these other people. So that's pretty cool. It's really not a bad album. If you like Ringo and if you like old standards, you're probably going to like this combination. I mean, for me personally, I like both of those things. So for me, it works. I like the combination. I think it's cool. Ringo recorded this album in spurts in between October of '69 right up until March of 1970, and it was released like, you know, a couple weeks after they finished doing it. It came out March 27th. And so it was done like in sporadic spurts, like basically as they were finishing up the finishing touches to Let It Be. You know, whenever the Threedles would get together and put some touches on Let It Be, they would get together and do that. But for the most part, you know, Paul was away in Scotland for the better end of 1969. George was doing whatever he was doing, and Ringo and John and Yoko were doing their own thing. So Ringo was basically on his own doing this album. But he got together with George Martin, and his group, the George Martin Orchestra, is the backing group on this album. Very, very well put together group of musicians. And so it's also funny because at this time, when this album was coming out, in early 1970, there was the Let It Be album, McCartney's first solo album, which he was making in secret until it eventually bubbled up and the other guys found out about it. And then this album. And also Hey Jude had just come out in America in February. So there was a lot of Beatles product that was going to be out in the spring market, and Capitol Records, Apple Records, everybody knew that they had to space these things out. You can't have all these things on the chart at one time. You got to give them space to breathe. And so, you know, Ringo's album was supposed to come out also sometime in April or maybe even May. And so, famously, Ringo went to Paul's house one day with a letter signed from John and George, and this story's been told a million times, but Ringo went over to play nice guy and said, hey man, hey Paul, we gotta ask you to push your album a little further back. You know, mine's already in the can here, we're almost done. You know, Let It Be's coming out. You gotta push yours back to at least till May. You know, this is just nice, you know, let's just do that. And Paul either told him to, quote, F off, or just, quote, get out. And needless to say, Ringo went back, and being the nice guy that he was, he fell on the sword and said, all right, you know what? I'm just going to put my album out first and get it out of the way. I know that the Beatles one's going to sell more. Let me just get this out of the way. And so they basically rush-released it at the end of March of 1970. And that's how it came out. So, yeah, this album is an album of standards, songs that are pre-war, pre-rock and roll, songs that they would have grown up on, hearing their family members sing when they were kids. And Ringo even put his family members into the pictures here onto this pub, the Empress Pub. Everybody on this album, every arranger on this album is different. And it ranges from everybody from Maurice Gibb from the Bee Gees to Klaus Voormann, their old bandmate, Klaus Voormann. Oh, I say bandmate, but, friend, the guy who did the Revolver album cover. And then Paul McCartney, but you also have some real heavy hitters on here, like, like Quincy Jones, and then obviously George Martin. They got Oliver Nelson and, like, Chick O'Farrell, and then Ringo's future collaborator, Richard Perry. So, you have some really big names on this thing, and, it's really not bad. I have to admit, it's really not bad. There's moments where it's like, okay. But overall, it's really not bad. Apparently, when this thing came out, John said that he was embarrassed for Ringo. I think George liked it. I don't know if Paul even heard it. But so the other guys, after pushing Ringo to do this, were kind of like, mixed results. The thing is, I think it was a gutsy move for Ringo to make, especially because you came from the biggest band in the world. Why not just try something different and see what happens? That was McCartney's first album was the same way. Hell, even the first Plastic Ono Band album is kind of like that. And then George was doing like, Wonderwall music and then electronic noise. I mean, there was some weird stuff from these guys as a solo artist. So yeah, Sentimental Journey opens this album. It's the name of the album. It's Ringo's lead-off track here. The album was originally going to be called Ringo Stardust, but the powers that be axed that. It's really not a bad song. Sentimental Journey, I think it's got a really cool, smooth vocal. And he loosens up a little bit in the chorus. I like the vibe going on in this one with his voice. He's not taking himself too seriously, and I think that's what works for this album. If he took himself seriously, I don't think it would have the same charm and the same effect. But I like his smooth voice on this. It's calm. It's not gonna, like blow your mind or something, but it's just a nice vocal. What's wrong with that? That one was arranged by Richard Perry. Night and Day by Chick O'Farrell is, I think, one of the best songs on the album. I mean, beyond being this humongous, bombastic, big band explosion, Ringo does an excellent vocal on this song. I think it's one of his best vocals ever. He's having a great time. He's just having fun. His night and day, just like letting it go. And I think that's so cool. I think it works really well for him. It's in his range. He's having a good time. Yeah. You can't say anything else about that. Great song. Whispering Grass and Don't Tell the Trees, arranged by Ron Goodwin. This one's okay. This isn't one of my favorite ones. I think his really chill kind of approach works well against the lush orchestration. There's a good balance there. But beyond that, not one of my favorites. Bye Bye Blackbird, done by Maurice Gibb from the Bee Gees, is, I think, one of my favorites on this one. Because it's got kind of like a cartoony vibe with the xylophone stuff in the background, but it's just a really fun track. And his last couple of bye-byes that he holds out totally rival the end of, A Little Help from My Friends, I would say. I mean, hearing him elongate those notes and keep them going, pretty cool. I'm a Fool to Care. This one's done by Klaus Voormann, and this could have been on any of his early solo albums beyond this. It sticks out like that. I think it's a great song, and Klaus's arrangement on this almost sounds like a small jazz combo, and that works very well. Keeping it simple, keeping it low-key, keeping it small, really allows Ringo to shine. And his really enunciated vocal on this one, I think, is really special. His vocals are almost like a lullaby in their delivery, but again, could have been on any of his solo albums in the early 70s. I can definitely see that on Good Night Vienna, no problem there. And then Stardust and Side 1, arranged by Macca. Really, you can tell it's Paul McCartney behind the scenes here. It's got this big, sweeping, syrupy, sappy ballad type of feel. This kind of treatment to the song. Ringo's got a bit of a sleepy voice going on here, kind of a simple approach until he does the whole "aw, hit me" thing, and then it just lets loose a little bit of craziness there, and then it returns back to the chill kind of vibe. But yeah. Overall, it's hard to go into detail about a lot of these songs musically because I mean you could, but a lot of them kind of tread the same ground. A lot of them have the big bombastic feel. A lot of them have the quiet sections with a couple of weird horn treatments here and there. So um, a lot of the songs give across that like samey feel, but not in a bad way. Side 2, Blue Turning Gray Over You, arranged by Oliver Nelson. I really love this song. Again, humongous, expressive, big band kind of sound. The drums are pretty wild. I like the bass and the piano on this one, really complementing each other. And again, excellent vocal from Ringo. He's awake this time and having fun. He does the whole hit me thing, and at the end he just kind of starts scat singing, and then he says, I just lost myself there. Which I think is pretty cool. I'm glad they kept that on there because again, reinstates he's just having a good time. Love is a many splendored thing, arranged by Quincy Jones. This one's great because this one for me sounds like you can just imagine people hanging out in the 40s, I guess, singing with each other, singing these old songs they've known forever, around a piano, you know, hanging out one night on a Saturday night, just getting the family together, having a good time. That's the vibe I get from this one for sure, and I think that's, I mean, partly inspired by Ringo's life probably because his family grew up singing these songs with him and he was singing them with them, so I get that vibe. Dream, arranged by George Martin, you know him. This one sounds like Only You, you know, from his, whatever album that was on, I can't think of it right now. A really calm, reflective vocal, and it works well against the brass work on this thing and the really peppy drums. The brass work on this song stands out because there's some really good low end, like I want to say tuba or French horn. I'm not the best in describing horns, but they hit some different timbres that work really well that aren't really seen on the rest of the album. And nothing like an old-fashioned key change either. Oh man, there it is, right out of the Dave Davies and Ray Davies playbook there. You Always Hurt the One You Love, arranged by John Dankworth. This one's really upbeat. There's some cool expressive drums. Horns are in just the right places. They kind of like fill in the gaps in between Ringo's vocals, and they propulse really nicely. They build really nicely. There's a really cool sax solo that happens, and the cymbal work on this one on the drums I think is fantastic. But yeah, good vocal, just good. Have I Told You Lately That I Love You by Elmer Bernstein did the arrangement here. More of that, like, this one for me is a bit cartoony in a dance hall show tunes, early 70s primetime special kind of way. It's got kind of that, like, vaudevillian fun to it. This one for me must be a bit of tongue-in-cheek. Like, there's no way anybody in the room could have been taking this one seriously. I think it's just a bit of fun. But Ringo's charm kind of saves it. The drums are all over the place on this one, which I like. The horns are fun. The ending is sort of hilarious. Yeah, not my favorite song on the album, but it's okay. It's passable. And then the last song on here, Let the Rest of the World Go By, arranged by Les Reed. For me, I think this is a perfect closer. It's got a bit of that, like, you know, late night, the bars closing up kind of feel. It's got that whole, like, you know, all right, back it up, guys, get out of here, you know, you can go home, but you can't stay here mentality. I like the big strings, the calm vocals, and the country tinge to it works really well. And good lead-in because his next album was a country album, but the big chorus vocals on this thing give it like a 1940s movie vibe. You know, like you always hear those movies with the songs in the background of these big choruses, you know, going on. And that's where it ends. So, I mean, here's the back cover. Here's Ringo waving at you, who freshly just cut his hair at that point, after having it long for a couple of years. Here's the cool Apple logo, Apple label. Inside too. I always love the Apple label. It's fun watching it spin on the turntable. So, when this album came out, it sold like 500,000 in its first week or two, which is pretty good. It hit number... consult my sheet. It hit number 22 in the US and number 7 in the UK. Which is pretty good. I mean, basically it was based off of just a Beatle putting an album out, and it sold pretty well. That said, Paul McCartney had like 2 million sales in pre-orders for his solo album, so ouch. But yeah, 1970 is an interesting time for the Beatles. I really love reading about the end of 1969 and throughout 1970 with their run-ins with each other and their albums they were putting out and how the Beatles were seen. I mean, when this album came out, Ringo was still basically saying, look, the Beatles are fine. We're going to pick up when we need to pick up. We'll do a project when we feel we need to do it. But then a month later, Paul's little Q&A packet came out with his album saying, like, nah, we're good. So that's that. But really not a bad album. Not something I'm going to pull out all the time and listen to, but it's been fun to get back into this album. It's been years since I've heard it. I mean, years. It's been a long time. But I was going through my record collection, and I was like, you know what? That would be a fun one to talk about. So I'd like to know your thoughts on this album because, personally, I think it's cool. I know this album gets ripped on like crazy, especially when it first came out. A lot of critics thought this was terrible. A lot of people thought his voice was bad. They thought the musicianship was hokey. You know, I'm coming into this from a guy who was born in the 80s and totally missed all this stuff. So for me, I think it's fun. I think it's cool. I like the standards. I like Ringo's voice. I like what he brings to the songs. It works. I think he was ahead of his time. And why not? It's only rock and roll. Take a risk. Do something different, you know? Get off my cloud. So, Sentimental Journey, Ringo Starr. My name is Giggens. This has been Album Reviews with Ringo, going on a sentimental journey. And that's it. So thank you so much for watching. And I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments down below. So, thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.